Welcome to Functional Philosophy. I'm Charles Tew. That's T as in Tango, E as in Echo, and W as in Whiskey. This is episode number 37, and its title is Abortion is Pro-Life. Hello everyone. Today I am going to talk about abortion. I will start with Ayn Rand's view, and then I will elaborate on what I think is the correct view, and then I'm going to explain the bad libertarian pro-abortion argument, and the bad religious anti-abortion argument. Now, what did Ayn Rand herself have to say about this issue? She said, quote, "A piece of protoplasm has no rights, and no life in the human sense of the term. One may argue about the later stages of a pregnancy, but the essential issue concerns only the first 3 months. To equate a potential with an actual is vicious. To advocate the sacrifice of the latter to the former is unspeakable." Unquote. So Ayn Rand's view is that only actual human beings have rights, and that, at least in the first trimester, it is absolutely clear that whatever exists in the woman's womb is not an actual human being. I agree with this entirely. Here's my view on abortion. Rights begin when a fetus becomes a biologically independent entity, i.e. an entity capable of surviving without being physically attached to its mother. This is called viability. Fetuses usually reach this stage by the 3rd trimester. So, abortion is incontestably legitimate in the 1st trimester, as Ayn Rand believed, gray toward the end of the 2nd, and should be illegal in the 3rd, in my view. However, rights don't apply when the metaphysical requirements of one life are at odds with the requirements of another. So even after viability, an unborn child can still be killed if the mother's life is at risk. Now, I call that killing a child. I'm not pretending that it's no longer killing an independent biological organism. It is, but that's legitimate. It's like if somebody puts a gun to your head and tells you to kill somebody else. Well, maybe you'll choose not to, but if you choose to save your own life, nobody can blame you for that. So this is my view, viability. Now, some objectivists seem to hold this standard abstractly, but they disagree on what viability means concretely. I have seen several objectivists suggest that independent entity means after the umbilical cord is cut and the baby has passed through the birth canal. Those are total non-essentials in my view. Whether the umbilical cord has actually been cut doesn't matter. The standard is, can it be cut with the baby surviving? And passage through the birth canal is also non-essential. If you take that as the standard, that's ridiculous. So a week before the baby is born, you can kill it, but as soon as it passes through the birth canal, then it's illegitimate? Why? There's no significant physiological difference that manifests in the space of only a week. So that's ridiculous. The standard is the thing a biologically independent organism? Is it going to inevitably develop into a rational being if it's cared for the right way? Now, I'm not saying it has to be able to go around and get food by itself, but it has to be capable of surviving without being physically attached to the mother. Now, people argue about viability, saying, well, viability gets earlier and earlier as our technology increases. So does viability change as we get better technology? What about when we get artificial wombs? No. Viability has to be by the standard of just what's naturally out there in the world. Otherwise, we are going to get to the point where we can create little boxes that can reorganize atoms, and presumably turn anything with the right constituent parts into a human being. What are we going to say then? It's immoral to kill a worm, any bug, because it's alive. And if we put it into this box, it will be reconfigured into a human being. So then what? We can't kill any bug because it's a potential human being? No, that's ridiculous. You have to have a line. And the line has to be, can this thing survive by the nature of a human being without being attached to the mother? And crazy medical technology doesn't change that. Now, there are some people who say abortion should be fine up to the moment the being passes through the birth canal and the umbilical cord is cut. Before that, you can abort. Up to 9 months, up to the very last second. Now, some alleged objectivists make this claim. So I want to read you a quote from something someone on Twitter said. He says, quote, "Nobody has the right to be inside another person against their will, regardless of how they ended up there. Any permission that one grants to another to be inside of them is subject to arbitrary revocation," unquote. Now, this may be the worst view on abortion conceivable. This is libertarian. This is utter rationalism. It is dropping all context and saying, well, people have rights to property, they have rights to their own bodies, so you don't have a right to be inside somebody else if that person doesn't want you in there. But this totally drops the context of the generation of human beings, of the unique nature of where human beings come from. Now, if you conceptualize abortion, as this person does, as the revocation of permission, you have endorsed a disastrous principle. Conceiving a human being inside your womb is not the same thing as giving it permission to exist. There's no independent thing to which you gave permission. It didn't exist until you created it. There's not this independently existing thing, and then you said, okay, I give you permission to be in my womb. There is no thing. You created it. You did not give it permission. So I agree. Permission can be revoked, but you didn't give permission to the baby. You created it. Now, if you take this seriously, if you conceptualize conception as permission to exist, well, then you will ultimately conclude that any parent can kill any child or any descendant because that person gave permission to those people to exist. Now, you can try to obfuscate this any way you want, but that is the actual logic. I mean, you have a child. You're raising it in your house. Can you revoke your permission to eat your food to the child that you're raising? I mean, did you give it permission to eat your food? And you can just arbitrarily revoke that, right? You have a right to revoke permission to be inside your body. Well, you have a right to revoke permission to eat your food. So can you just do that? I mean, you have no obligation to keep this thing inside of you. You just gave it permission to exist there. So by the same token, you have no obligation to feed your child. You're just giving it permission to eat, right? And don't try to get out of this by saying, well, you can put it up for adoption, so you can revoke permission. No. It's possible in principle. Nobody wants your child. And you cannot just dump the child on the state. If you brought it into the world, it's your responsibility to take care of it, not anybody else's or the state's, because the state would have to take money and time from other people to do that. So obviously that is nonsense. This is a reductio ad absurdum of this idea. If you bring a child into the world, you have obligations toward it once it becomes an actual human being. And if you say, well, no, because I have a right to get anything out of my body, I don't want in there. Okay, well, then you have a right to kill any child you created at any point in time, even when he's 40 years old, because you just gave him permission to exist. I mean, this is total rationalism. No, it is not permission. There is no permission to something that didn't yet exist. That is nonsense. So this is a stupid, libertarian, rationalistic idea. And if you actually think of it in terms of permission, you are going to come to all kinds of nonsensical conclusions. If you just see some guy and you give him permission to enter your house, okay, you can revoke it and tell him to leave. That's not the situation you're in with a baby. It's not this independent thing that you gave permission to. You created it inside of you. You have a responsibility for it because you created it. Now we're accepting rape here. But if you see a baby crying on the side of the road, I mean, you may take it in and take care of it, but you have no obligation to. But if you created it, you have an obligation. And you have more than enough time during the first 3 months to get an abortion. So, except in crazy circumstances, such as you were held prisoner somewhere or your life is at risk, in general, once it's likely the baby is a viable human being, then you cannot abort it. And if you say, oh, well, you can because you're just revoking your permission for it to be in your womb. Well, what that really means is you're revoking permission for it to exist. And if you think of it that way, well, then you can abuse your children because you're just giving them permission. You can kill anybody whose existence you're responsible for, any of your descendants, because you just gave them permission. I mean, that whole line is nonsense. But now let's get to the religious anti-abortion view. Now they use the alleged trickiness with viability against abortion, but their actual motive for being anti-abortion, for making it illegal even in the first 3 months, is because they hate human life. Calling it pro-life is the most disgusting lie. They are anti-life. Do you know why they're against abortion? It's for the same reason they're against contraception. It's for the same reason they insist that marriage should be for the children, that sex should be for procreation. What does this constellation of ideas signify? Well, it makes it pretty clear. Religious conservatives are against abortion because being forced to carry a child to term undercuts the joy of sex, the selfish, life-serving pleasure of sex. The physical pleasure, they hate the physical world, but also the spiritual pleasure. They hate happiness. How dare you engage in sex for your own selfish ends? It should be for procreation. You do it because you have to, not because you enjoy it. And we want to undercut that pleasure every way we can. So if we make it a risk that having sex is going to produce a child that burdens you for 18 years, thank God. We want that risk always to be there. So no, you can't use contraception. No, you shouldn't use condoms. No, you can't get an abortion. Why? Because we hate pleasure. We hate happiness. This is the motivation of the religious anti-abortion types. And this is why it is crucially important that you be able to get an abortion in the first 3 months. Now, there has to be a beginning to rights at some point. So we have to have a line. But the requirements for a legitimate line are that it is pro-life. It serves human beings. It actually demarcates an intelligible spot after which people can't just kill each other, and it demarcates that in a rational way, which is what viability does, and the line has to not undercut crucial human survival needs, and sex is one of those. And if you make abortion illegal, if you say, no, you can't get an abortion at all after conception, the whole point of that is anti-life. That's the whole point of religion, is to be anti-life. Anti-life in this world. that disqualifies conception as the starting point of rights. No. Because what that does is make it impossible for human beings to live and be happy. Because it undercuts one of their highest, most crucial values. That cannot be legitimate. Rights cannot be defined in such a way that they deprive people of the highest human pleasures, which is what sex is. Religious conservatives hate sex because what comes to the forefront of your consciousness when you have sex? Two things. Your own competence and the benevolence of the universe. The possibility of values in this world, not a mystical other dimension, and your own goodness and capability and heroism. Surely you felt this when you've had an orgasm. It's an emotional feeling. It's not just physical. They hate the physical part too, of course, but what they really hate is the spiritual pleasure. They really hate the idea that in sex you get a feeling of, I love this world and I'm capable of living in it. And I'm great. Pride is their cardinal sin. And they hate this material world. This is an evil, sinful, lowly thing compared to heaven. And of course, human beings are just lowly sinners. And what comes out in sex? What emotions, what feelings? I'm great and the world is great. Religious people cannot tolerate that. So they undercut it in any way they can, and that is the motivation driving the seriously religious. If you have any questions about abortion, if any of this was confusing or you'd like me to elaborate, you can leave a comment, send me an email at charles.a.2@gmail.com. You can visit my website and leave a comment in the feedback box, the message box, whatever it's called there. You can find all my work and ways to support it at my website, which is charlestew.com. The best way you can support me is on Patreon. Thanks for listening. Let's meet again in episode 38.